Sinister love triangle. Sister turns killer, murdering her own kin over husband. The bond between sisters is said to be one of the strongest on Earth. It's a shared history, a secret language, a bond forged in childhood laughter and tears. It's supposed to be a safe harbor in the storms of life. But what happens when that harbor becomes a hunting ground? When the shared history is rewritten with jealousy and resentment? This is the story of two sisters who loved the same man, and the twisted, obsessive love that turned one of them into a monster. It is a story of the ultimate betrayal, where the one person you should have been able to trust becomes the reason you take your last breath. Of course, here is a more detailed and expanded version of Chapter 1, focusing on atmosphere, character depth, and the subtle details that launch the investigation. The house was a masterpiece of serene, domestic perfection. It wasn't a house that shouted its wealth. It whispered it, in the language of impeccable taste and understated luxury. Sunlight, clean and golden, streamed through the large, floor-to-ceiling windows that formed the back wall of the living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent constellations. It cast a warm, buttery glow on the tastefully arranged modern furniture, the hand-woven rug with its subtle geometric patterns, the carefully chosen art on the walls. It was the kind of house featured in lifestyle magazines, a carefully curated canvas of muted colors, natural textures, and personal touches that spoke of a happy, successful, and deeply considered life. It was a place where nothing bad was ever supposed to happen, which made the scene in the master bedroom all the more jarring. A brutal, visceral slash of violence across a perfect painting. Detective Kate Harding stood in the doorway, her presence a stark, unwelcome intrusion of grim reality into the tranquil space. She was a tall woman, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb every detail without judgment. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense ponytail, and her practical dark pantsuit was a stark contrast to the soft, luxurious world she had just stepped into. She took in the details with a practiced, dispassionate eye, a mental checklist of wrongness. The room, like the rest of the house, was a study in serene minimalism. A large, king-sized bed with a simple, elegant headboard was covered in a rumpled but luxurious duvet. The walls were a soft, calming shade of gray. The art was abstract and peaceful, but the peace was a lie. The victim, Amelia Parker, lay on the plush, cream-colored rug near the foot of the bed. She was dressed in expensive-looking yoga pants and a simple heather-gray t-shirt, suggesting her day had begun with the promise of ordinary, peaceful Rutinia cup of tea, a session on the yoga mat, a walk in the sun-drenched garden visible through the bedroom's own large window. That promise had been brutally, violently broken. The cause of death was obvious and horrific blunt force trauma to the head. It had been a crime of extreme personal violence, an act of rage that had left a devastating, bloody aftermath. The room was in a state of controlled chaos. Several drawers from the sleek, modern dresser were pulled out, their contents neatly folded sweaters and delicate lingerie spilling onto the floor in a mockery of a search. The jewelry box on the dresser was open and empty, its velvet lining stark and bare. A large, abstract painting, a swirl of blues and greens that had likely once been a calming focal point, had been knocked from the wall, its frame splintered, its glass shattered across the rug. It was staged to look like a robbery gone wrong, a frantic, violent search for valuables that had been tragically interrupted. But Harding, a veteran of dozens of such scenes, saw the flaws in the performance immediately. A high-end laptop and a designer purse, likely containing cash and credit cards, sat untouched on a nearby armchair. An expensive-looking watch, its diamond bezel catching the light, lay on the nightstand next to a half-finished glass of water. The supposed thieves had been strangely, illogically selective. Her partner, Detective Miller, a broad, rumpled man just a few years from retirement, was kneeling, carefully examining the splintered picture frame on the floor with a gloved finger. "The painting is of the two of them," he said, his voice a low, gravelly grumble. "The victim and the husband. The glass is shattered. Looks like the killer took his anger out on it." Harding knelt beside him, the scent of blood and something metallic hanging in the air. It wasn't just the glass that was shattered. She looked closer. The photo itself, a happy vacation shot of a smiling, sun-kissed couple on a boat, had been specifically, deliberately targeted. The husband's face had been violently scratched and gouged, as if by a sharp fingernail or the tip of a key. The smiling image of Amelia was untouched. This wasn't a random burglar's rage. This was the fury of a scorned lover, a focused, intimate act of desecration. The husband, Ben Parker, sat in the sun-drenched living room, a shell of a man wrapped in a coarse, police-issue blanket that looked utterly alien in the elegant surroundings. He was, or had been, a handsome man, a successful architect whose innovative designs were featured in the same magazines his wife's home was worthy of. But now, his face, pale and etched with a profound, uncomprehending disbelief, was a mask of utter devastation. He had been the one to find her. He'd come home from a morning site visit to this unimaginable horror. His story was simple, straightforward, and delivered in a numb, monotone voice. He had left for work at 7 a.m. Amelia was alive, just back from her morning run, her face flushed and beautiful. She was drinking coffee and planning her day. They had kissed goodbye, a routine, loving gesture that was now a torturous memory. He had called her around 10 a.m. to check in, a daily habit, but she hadn't answered. He had assumed she was busy, perhaps at the new art gallery she had just opened, or meeting with a client for her interior design business. He had come home at noon to find this. Was anything missing? Harding asked, her voice gentle but firm, a careful balance of empathy and professionalism. Anything of significant value? Ben shook his head, his gaze lost in the middle distance, fixed on the dancing dust motes in the sunlight. I don't know. I don't care. Her jewelry, I guess. The box was empty, but she had this one necklace. My grandmother's. A small, simple gold locket. It was the first thing I ever gave her, when we were just starting out, before we had any of this. He gestured vaguely at the perfect room. It was never in the jewelry box. She kept it in a special porcelain dish on her nightstand. It's gone. He finally looked at Harding, his eyes a raw, desperate plea for understanding. They could have taken everything else. Why that? It wasn't even worth much. The arrival of the victim's sister was a fresh wave of grief crashing into the already devastated home. Clara Evans was the physical opposite of her sister, a study in dramatic contrasts. Where Amelia had been fair-haired, with a serene, sun-kissed beauty and a calm, centered presence, Clara was dark and intense, a whirlwind of chaotic, artistic energy. She was a struggling artist, her clothisa paint-spattered black tunic and ripped gianza stark contrast to the quiet elegance of the house. Her hands were stained with charcoal and clay, her dark hair a wild, untamed mane. She burst into the house, bypassing the uniformed officer at the door, her face a mask of frantic, theatrical anguish. No, 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 she wailed, a gut-wrenching, animal sound of pain. She saw Ben and collapsed into his arms. He held her, the two of them clinging to each other, two pillars of a collapsed world, their shared grief a palpable thing in the silent room. Harding watched the scene with a professional, analytical quiet. The bond between the brother-in-law and sister-in-law was clearly strong, a lifeline in this maelstrom of horror. But there was something in Clara's grief that felt off. It was too loud, too performative, a grand, operatic display that seemed to demand an audience. And her focus, even in her supposed shock, seemed to be entirely on Ben. Her hands clutched at his shirt, her face buried in his chest. It was a gesture of comfort that felt almost proprietary, almost possessive. Later, as the forensics team was still working, a quiet, humming hive of activity in the master bedroom, Clara sat with Ben on the couch. Her hand was constantly on his arm, his shoulder, a ceaseless, comforting touch. Harding approached them, her notebook in hand. Clara, I know this is an impossible time, she began, her voice carefully modulated. But can you think of anyone who would have wanted to harm your sister? Anyone who had a grudge against her? Clara looked up, her large, dark, expressive eyes swimming with tears. Harm Amelia? No, everyone loved her. She was perfect. She had the perfect life, the perfect husband. Everything. The last words were spoken with a faint, almost imperceptible trace of bitterness, a shadow that flickered and was gone. And your relationship with her? You were close. We were sisters, Clara said, as if that explained everything and nothing at all. Of course we were close. She was my big sister. I was just at her gallery opening last night. It was a huge success. She was so happy, so vibrant. She looked at Ben, her eyes locking with his. We were all so proud of her. You saw her last night? Harding's senses sharpened. Yes, we all did. Ben and I were both there to support her. It was her big night, Clara said, squeezing Ben's arm again. She was the star of the family. As always. Harding made a mental note. Then she decided to probe a different, more specific angle. The locket, she said, looking at Ben, but directing the question at them both. The one you said was missing. What did it look like? Before Ben could answer, his mind still clouded with grief, Clara spoke, her voice surprisingly clear and detailed. It was a small, heart-shaped gold locket. Very simple, almost plain. It had a tiny, almost invisible scratch on the back, just to the left of the clasp, from when she dropped it on the stone patio a few years ago. She looked at Harding, her expression one of pure, shared grief, a sister remembering a treasured, intimate detail. It was her most treasured possession. Harding held her gaze, a chill creeping up her spine that had nothing to do with the air-conditioned coolness of the house. It was a perfect, detailed description, almost too perfect. The crime scene was still sealed. No one but the police and Ben knew the locket was missing. No one could have known about the small, intimate, almost secret detail of the scratch on the back. It was a detail one would only know from holding it, from examining it closely. A cold, unsettling thought began to form in Harding's mind. Clara wasn't just describing the locket from memory. She was describing it as if she had held it in her hand very, very recently. In the shattered, perfect house, amidst the staged chaos and the genuine, soul-crushing grief, Harding realized she wasn't just investigating a murder. She was investigating a family. And the deepest, most dangerous secrets were not in the ransacked drawers, but in the twisted, hidden chambers of the human heart. The days following Amelia's murder were a slow, painful process of peeling back the layers of a seemingly perfect life. The investigation began with a series of formal interviews, each one designed to test the foundations of the stories they had been told. Ben Parker's interview took place at the precinct. He was a man adrift in a sea of grief and confusion. He spoke of his love for Amelia in glowing terms, their marriage a partnership of mutual respect and deep affection. But when Harding steered the conversation toward his relationship with Clara, the narrative became more complex. Clara, she's always been the fragile one, Ben explained, his voice heavy. Amelia was the rock, the sun. Clara was the moon, always in her shadow. I felt a need to protect her, I guess. We connected on a different level. Amelia didn't really understand my passion for abstract art, for obscure music. Clara did. We could talk for hours about it. She got that side of me. He was trying to be helpful, to explain the family dynamic, but what he was inadvertently revealing was a deep, emotional intimacy with his sister-in-law that went beyond the conventional. Clara's interview was a masterpiece of subtle manipulation. She presented herself as the grieving, overshadowed sister. She spoke lovingly of Amelia, but her words were laced with a faint, almost invisible poison. She painted a picture of Amelia as being a little controlling, a little too perfect, perhaps not fully appreciating a man as deep and sensitive as Ben. She skillfully positioned herself not as a rival, but as Ben's true confidant, the only one who truly understood his soul. Amelia loved him, of course, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. But I'm not sure she ever really saw him. She was carefully planting the seeds of a troubled marriage narrative, a narrative that simply didn't exist in any of the evidence. The investigative team began a deep dive into the digital lives of all three. What they found was a mountain of communication between Ben and Clara. Texts, emails, social media messages. On the surface, it was all innocent links to articles about artists, playlists of obscure bands, complaints about their respective days. But the sheer volume of it was staggering. A constant, daily stream of contact that was far more frequent than Ben's communication with his own wife. They also found a series of texts from Amelia to her best friend, sent in the weeks leading up to the murder. Clara's been intense lately. One message read, "She's always at the house. I know she's Ben's friend too, but it feels like I can't be alone with my own husband." It was a small, vague flicker of unease, but it was there. The alibis were checked and rechecked. Ben had been at a well-documented work dinner with a dozen colleagues. His timeline was solid. Clara's alibi was that she had been at her rented art studio across town, alone, working on a new sculpture. It was weak, unverifiable, but plausible. The case felt like it was stalling, a web of emotional complexity with no hard evidence to anchor it. Then the first real break came. A detective, canvassing the neighborhood for security footage, found a camera on a house 2 blocks away from the Parker residence. The camera, pointed down the street, had captured a car turning onto Amelia Street at 8:15 a.m. on the morning of the murder, and leaving at 9:45 a.m. The car was a beat-up, older model sedan, the same make and model as Clara's. It was too far away to see the license plate, but the car had a distinctive, large crack in the passenger side taillight. A crack that matched the one on Clara's car perfectly. Her weak alibi had just been shattered. She had lied. She had been at her sister's house during the exact window of time the murder had occurred. The discovery of the car placed Clara at the scene, but it wasn't enough to prove murder. Harding knew they needed to understand the why. The motive couldn't just be a simple, sudden jealousy. It had to be something deeper, a resentment that had been festering for years. The investigation needed to go deeper than the present, into the shared history of the two sisters. Harding arranged a meeting with the sisters' parents, a quiet, heartbroken couple living in a retirement community 2 states away. In a long, painful conversation, they painted a picture of the sun and moon dynamic that had defined their daughters' lives. Amelia, the older sister, had been the golden child, effortlessly brilliant, popular, and beautiful. She was the one who never caused trouble, the one who always succeeded. Clara was the difficult one, the moody, artistic child who was always struggling, always competing for a sliver of the sunlight her sister so easily commanded. They loved both their daughters, they insisted, but it was clear that their family life had revolved around Amelia's achievements and Clara's problems. They had, with the best of intentions, created a crucible of sibling rivalry. The true aha moment, the key that unlocked the dark chamber of Clara's mind, came from a search of her art studio. Tucked away in a dusty portfolio, beneath a stack of charcoal sketches, the detectives found her private journal. It was not a simple diary. It was a shrine to her obsession. The pages were filled with a dark, twisted fantasy. She wrote about Ben not as her sister's husband, but as her own destined soulmate, a man whose soul cried out to hers. She reinterpreted every casual conversation, every shared laugh, every friendly gesture from Ben as a secret declaration of his love for her. She wrote about Amelia not with overt hatred, but with a kind of condescending pity, seeing her as a beautiful but shallow vessel who was undeserving of Ben's depth, an obstacle in the path of their true love. The final entries from the days just before the murder were chilling. "The universe has given me a sign," she wrote. "He is trapped, and only I have the key to set him free. A great love requires a great sacrifice. I must be strong enough to make it for both of us." The motive was no longer simple jealousy. It was a heroic, albeit completely delusional, fantasy. In her own mind, she was not a murderer. She was a savior. Armed with the footage of the car and the chilling words from the journal, Harding confronted Clara in the interrogation room. The mask of the grieving sister dissolved, replaced by a cold, defiant fury. She didn't confess, but she raged against them. "You wouldn't understand," she spat, her eyes blazing. "You can't possibly comprehend a love like ours. You're just trying to destroy something beautiful. Her facade had not just cracked. It had been utterly obliterated, revealing the obsessive, dangerous mind beneath. Of course, here is a more detailed and expanded version of Chapter 4, focusing on the psychological turning point for Ben, the critical discoveries of the forensics team, and the final, chilling confrontation. The next step for Detective Harding was a difficult, but grimly necessary one. She had to take the fragile, theoretical case she had built from journals and security footage and turn it into a weapon. She had to confront Ben Parker with the truth, a truth so monstrous it would shatter the very foundations of his world. He was not just a grieving husband. He was the unwitting centerpiece of a deadly, delusional obsession, and she needed him to see it, to believe it. His testimony, his perspective, would be the emotional core of the case against Clara. She arranged the meeting not at his temporary, sterile apartment, but in the neutral territory of the precinct, in an interview room that was quiet, private, and devoid of distractions. Ben arrived looking even more broken than before. The sharp, handsome lines of his face had softened into a mask of pure, weary grief. He was a man running on fumes, haunted by the violent, inexplicable loss of his wife. Harding didn't begin with accusations. She began with a quiet, factual recounting of the evidence, laying it out piece by piece like a surgeon arranging her instruments. She started with the footage of Clara's car. She played the grainy, time-stamped video on a laptop, showing the distinctive, beat-up sedan with its cracked taillight turning onto his street during the time of the murder, and then leaving. Ben stared at the screen, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. That's Clara's car. But she said she was at her studio. Why would she lie about that? He was trying to find an innocent explanation to make the puzzle piece fit into the world he understood. We believe she lied because she was here, Ben, Harding said, her voice gentle but firm. She was in your house when Amelia was killed. Then, she slid a thin file across the table. It contained photocopied pages from Clara's journal. She had carefully selected the most damning entries, the ones that laid bare the depth of her delusion. Ben picked up the pages, his hands trembling slightly. He began to read. Harding watched as his expression shifted, a slow, horrifying dawning of a new reality. He read Clara's words about their cosmic connection. He read his own innocent gesture, shared laugh, a sympathetic touch on the arm interpreted and magnified into secret declarations of a profound, hidden love. He saw his own words, his complaints about a difficult client or a frustrating project, twisted into cries for help, pleas for Clara to rescue him from his shallow life with Amelia. This was the moment of horrifying clarity for Ben. As he read Clara's words, his face went from grief to confusion, and then to a mask of absolute, sickening horror. He saw, for the first time, how his innocent friendship, his shared intimacies about art and music, had been a poison that had fed her madness. He was forced to confront his own profound naivety and the terrible, unwitting role he had played. He was overcome with a tidal wave of guilt and a profound, nauseating understanding. The woman he had tried to protect, the fragile, artistic sister he had felt sorry for, was a monster who had murdered his wife. He let the pages fall from his fingers and buried his face in his hands, his body racked with a new, even more terrible kind of grief. While Ben grappled with this new, unbearable reality, the forensics team, conducting a more thorough, fine-toothed search of Clara's art studio, found the final, crucial pieces of the puzzle. Hidden in plain sight, standing on a pedestal in a corner among her other abstract works, was the murder weapon. It was a heavy, abstract sculpture made of polished, black granite, a swirl of stone that was both beautiful and menacing. A sharp-eyed detective had recognized it. It was not one of Clara's own creations. It was a piece from Amelia and Ben's own living room. It was one of the first major art pieces Amelia, a budding interior designer, had ever purchased for their home. It had been a symbol of their shared success, their shared taste, their shared life. Clara had taken this symbol of her sister's happiness and had used it to bludgeon her to death. She had then taken it back to her studio, not to hide it, but to possess it, to display it as a trophy among her own work. When tested, the sculpture revealed microscopic traces of Amelia's blood and hair embedded in the porous stone. And then they found the final, damning piece of evidence. Tucked away in a small, locked metal box in a dusty storage closet. A box that contained old love letters from a college boyfriend and other mementos of a life she had deemed unworthy. They found the missing gold locket. It was not damaged. It was not hidden. It was carefully wrapped in a piece of velvet cloth. She had kept it as a trophy, a symbol of her ultimate victory, the final, tangible piece of her sister's life, and her husband's love that she now possessed. With the murder weapon, the trophy, the confession from the journal, and the shattered alibi from the security footage, the case was ironclad. It was time to move. Harding and a team of uniformed officers went to the studio to arrest her. They found Clara working, a smear of clay on her cheek, a look of intense concentration on her face. When she saw them, her expression was not one of fear or guilt, but of pure, unadulterated annoyance, as if they were unwelcome intruders interrupting a moment of profound artistic creation. "What is this?" she demanded, as Harding read her rights. "Clara Evans, you're under arrest for the murder of your sister, Amelia Parker," Harding said, her voice devoid of emotion. Clara's reaction was not one of remorse or fear. It was one of bitter, venomous betrayal. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she looked past the officers and directly at Harding, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury. "You've ruined everything," she screamed, her voice echoing in the large, cavernous studio. "You don't understand. We were meant to be together. He loves me. You've just destroyed something beautiful." She was not a killer being brought to justice. In her mind, she was a tragic heroine, the protagonist of a great and epic love story, whose perfect future had just been stolen away by the brutish, uncomprehending forces of the world. As they led her away, a struggling, screaming fury of diluted passion, Harding looked around the studio, at the tortured, abstract figures Clara had sculpted. They were all faceless, twisted forms, reaching for something they could never grasp. They were, Harding realized, self-portraits. The trial of Clara Evans was not the dramatic, suspenseful courtroom battle the media had anticipated. Facing an insurmountable mountain of evidence, the security footage of her car, the murder weapon hidden in her studio, the stolen locket, and the chilling, undeniable confession written in her own hand in her journal, her defense attorney had little to work with. There would be no surprise witnesses, no shocking twists. There was only the cold, hard weight of the truth. Clara's only strategy was to take the stand in her own defense, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to sell her delusion to a jury of 12 strangers. She was a masterful performer. She transformed from the sullen, angry woman they had seen in handcuffs into a tragic, misunderstood heroine. She wept. She spoke of a profound, all-consuming love, a cosmic connection, with Ben that transcended earthly concepts like marriage vows. She painted a picture of herself not as a killer, but as a savior, a woman who had committed a terrible but necessary act to free the man she loved from a shallow, unfulfilling life. But it was her confession, delivered in a long, chilling monologue to the police psychologists after her arrest, that truly sealed her fate. It was a confession devoid of remorse, a detailed and dispassionate recounting of a lifetime of perceived slights, of living in her sister's long, perfect shadow. She described her first meeting with Ben not as a casual introduction, but as a moment of cosmic recognition, a literal meeting of souls. She truly, delusionally believed that she was acting out a great love story, and that Amelia was simply a temporary, unfortunate obstacle that had to be removed for the story to reach its proper conclusion. She showed no remorse for killing her sister, only a profound, bitter anger that her perfect future with Ben had been so cruelly destroyed by the police. She was not a killer being brought to justice. In her mind, she was a tragic heroine whose happy ending had been stolen away. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was a formality. Clara Evans was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and armed robbery. The judge, his face a mask of cold fury, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As she was led from the courtroom, she looked at Ben, who sat, hollow-eyed, in the front row. Her expression was not one of apology, but of bitter, venomous betrayal. "You were supposed to wait for me," she screamed, her voice echoing in the silent, stunned courtroom. The monster had been caged, but the haunting echoes of her madness would linger long after the prison doors had closed. The final chapter of the story focuses on Ben Parker. He is a man utterly shattered, his life a wasteland of grief and a profound, soul-crushing guilt. He has not only lost his wife in the most brutal way imaginable, but he must live with the knowledge that his sister-in-law, a woman he had cared for, confided in, and tried to protect, was the monster responsible. He is a man forced to live in the wreckage of two lives he loved, one taken from him, the other revealed to be a lie. He is haunted by memories, but they are no longer the sweet, comforting ghosts of his life with Amelia. They are twisted, poisoned by his new knowledge. He is forced to replay every conversation with Clara, every shared secret, every moment of friendship, now seeing it all through the horrifying lens of her obsession. A shared laugh over a bad movie is no longer an innocent moment. It is a sign of encouragement. A sympathetic ear lent to her struggles as an artist is no longer a kind gesture. It is a declaration of his special understanding of her soul. He sees, with agonizing clarity, how his own kindness, his own naivety, had been the water that had fed the poisoned root of her delusion. He can no longer live in the beautiful house, the masterpiece of serene perfection that he and Amelia had built together. Every sun-drenched room is now a crime scene. Every beautiful object is a painful reminder. The bedroom is a place of unimaginable horror. He sells it, taking only a few personal items, and moves into a sterile, anonymous apartment downtown, a minimalist box that reflects the emptiness of his new life. He tries to work, to lose himself in the familiar logic of blueprints and stress-bearing walls, but his focus is gone. He is a man adrift, a ghost in his own life. His friends and family try to reach out, but he is unreachable, locked in a private prison of what-ifs. What if he had seen the signs? What if he had created more distance? What if his friendship with Clara had not just been innocent, but a selfish indulgence, a way to get the artistic validation that his more practical wife couldn't always provide? The guilt is a constant, suffocating companion. The final scene takes place months after the trial. Ben is finally packing up the last few boxes from the house, which has been sold. The movers have taken all the furniture. The rooms are empty, echoing, and sad. As he is clearing out a drawer in Amelia's home office, a space he had avoided until now, he finds a small, beautifully wrapped gift tucked away at the back. It is a book, and he recognizes the cover instantly. It is a rare, first edition of a book of poetry by an obscure German artist, a book he had mentioned wanting months ago in an offhand conversation. He had forgotten all about it. Amelia had not. He unwraps it carefully, his hands trembling. Inside the cover, in her elegant, familiar handwriting, Amelia had written a note. "To my wonderful, brilliant husband, I may not always understand the art, but I will always, always understand the beautiful, complex, wonderful man who loves it. Thank you for filling my life with a beauty I could never have imagined. I love you more than words can say." He clutches the book to his chest, the tangible proof of his wife's deep, quiet, and unconditional love. It is a voice from the grave, a final, heartbreaking message that cuts through the noise of his guilt and her sister's madness. She had seen him. She had understood him in her own quiet, profound way. And in the silent, empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that had been so brutally stolen, Ben Parker finally allows himself to break down completely. The sobs are not just for his lost wife, but for his own lost innocence, for the terrible knowledge of the darkness that can hide behind a familiar face. Justice has been served, the monster has been caged, but the lives caught in this twisted, tragic triangle are shattered forever. The perfect life had been a fragile illusion, destroyed not by a monster from the outside, but by a quiet, insidious darkness that had been nurtured within the family itself.